The mining colony of 7 sat at the edge of known space. It was not a pretty place. The buildings were made of gray metal. The air smelled like machines and dust. The sky was always orange because of the distant dying sun, but for 8-year-old, this ugly place was home. Lived with her father in a small room on the 3rd floor of Building 9. The room had 2 beds, a tiny kitchen, and 1 window that looked out at the cargo ships coming and going. On the wall hung a picture of a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. That was Smother. She had been dead for 2 years now. Worked as a lead engineer. He fixed the big machines that made the air breathable and the water clean. He left early in the morning and came back late at night. His hands were always covered in oil and his eyes were always tired, but he never forgot to kiss forehead before she slept. Was often alone, but she was never lonely. She was a honey badger. He was about 40 centimeters long with thick gray fur and a white stripe running down his back. His eyes were small and black and always watching. His claws were sharp and curved like little knives. When he walked, he moved low to the ground like he was always ready to fight something. Smother had saved from a bad man who sold illegal animals. The man had kept in a tiny cage and hit him when he made noise. When Smother found him, he was thin and angry and scared. She took him home and fed him and spoke to him softly until he stopped being afraid. When Smother stayed. He slept at the foot of his bed every night. He followed her everywhere she went. When she cried, he would push his head against her hand until she stopped. He was not a pet. He was family. The other beings on 7 did not understand this. The colony was home to 3 races. There were the humans, who did most of the hard work. There were the tall, thin creatures with blue skin and long fingers who handled the money and the trading. And there were the large beings with 4 arms and rough brown skin who did the heavy lifting and the security work. The thought they were better than everyone else. They wore expensive clothes and spoke in soft voices and looked at humans the way humans might look at insects. They were simple and direct. They respected strength and nothing else. To them, humans were weak and not worth thinking about. Lord was the ambassador on 7. He was tall even for a with pale blue skin and eyes that never seemed to blink. He wore rings on every finger and robes made of shimmering fabric. He smiled often, but his smiles never reached his eyes. One day, Lord saw walking through the market within her arms. He stopped and watched her pass. His assistant, a younger named, stood beside him. "What is that creature?" Lord asked. "A honey badger," said. "An earth animal. The humans classify it as dangerous." Lord laughed. The sound was high and thin like breaking glass. "Dangerous? That tiny thing, it looks like a fat rat." "The classification says it is very aggressive," said. "It does not know fear." "Nothing that small can be truly dangerous," Lord said. He watched disappear into the crowd. "Humans are strange. They bond with anything, even vermin." He did not think about the girl or the honey badger again. This was his first mistake. Knew the aliens did not like humans much. She saw how they looked down at her father when he came to fix their broken machines. She saw how they pushed humans out of their way on the streets, but she did not care. She had her father. She had the memory of her mother's smile. That was enough. Every evening, when her father was working late, would sit by the window and watch the ships. She would hold in her lap and tell him stories about the places those ships were going. She made up worlds with purple oceans and trees made of crystal. She imagined adventures where she was a brave explorer and was her loyal partner. One day, she would whisper to him, "We will leave this place. We will see everything." Would look up at her with his small black eyes and make a low sound in his throat. It was not quite a purr and not quite a growl. It was his way of saying he was listening. Worried about his daughter. He knew she was lonely. He knew she spent too much time alone. But he did not know what else to do. The colony needed him. The machines needed him. And without his work, they would have no money for food or medicine or the small treats he brought home to make smile. "You are so much like your mother," he told her one night. He was sitting on the edge of her bed, his hands still dirty from work. She was brave, too. She never let anyone tell her what she could not do. "Tell me about her," said. She asked this every night. So told her. He told her about how they met on a transport ship. He told her about their wedding in a garden on Earth. He told her about the day he was born and how her mother had cried with joy. He told her about the pirate raid and how her mother had died protecting the colony's children. "She was a hero," said. "Yes," said she was. He kissed her forehead and turned off the light. At the door he stopped. He said, "If anything ever happens, if you are ever in danger, you run, you hide. You use the emergency beacon I gave you. Do you understand?" "Yes, Father." "Promise me." "I promise." He closed the door, lay in the dark, listening to his footsteps fade away, climbed up onto her chest and settled there, his warmth spreading through her like a blanket. She was not afraid. She had never been afraid, not since her mother died. Fear was for people who had something to lose, had already lost the most important thing. What else could the universe take from her? She did not know that soon she would find out. In the shadows of 7, bad things were beginning to move. Lord had gambling debts that he could not pay. The syndicate had made him an offer, and somewhere in the dark spaces between the stars, there were buyers who would pay a fortune for a human child. None of them knew about the honey badger. None of them knew about the girl who had stopped being afraid. None of them knew what happens when you threaten the family of someone who has nothing left to lose. They would learn. The galaxy would learn. The syndicate was a criminal organization that operated in the dark spaces between star systems. They traded in illegal goods, stolen technology, and living beings. Their ships moved like ghosts through the shipping lanes, never staying in one place long enough to be caught. Their leader was unnamed. He was old and missing one of his 4 arms. He had lost it in a fight 30 years ago and had never bothered to replace it. He said the empty sleeve reminded him to never underestimate anyone again. But even made mistakes. For months, his agents had been watching the human population on 7. They had learned something interesting. Human children, especially young ones, were valuable, very valuable. In the outer rim of the galaxy, wealthy collectors paid huge sums for them. Human children were emotional and expressive and bonded easily with their owners. They made perfect companions for lonely beings who wanted something to care for them. It was a disgusting trade, but it was also very profitable. Agents had identified several targets on 7, but one stood out. A girl named. She was young and healthy and had no mother. Her father worked long hours and often left her alone. She would be easy to take. Lord had been the key. The ambassador owed the syndicate more money than he could ever repay. Once agents approached him, he had 2 choices: help them take the girl or lose everything: his title, his wealth, his life. Chose to help. On the night of the taking, the colony's power grid failed. It was not an accident. Contacts had arranged it. The lights went out across the residential blocks. The security systems went dark. The cameras stopped recording. In Building 9 was alone in her room. Her father was working the night shift at the atmospheric processors on the other side of the colony. She had eaten dinner, done her homework, and was getting ready for bed. Was lying on the floor, chewing on a piece of dried meat. When the lights went out, did not panic. Power failures happen sometimes. She found her flashlight and turned it on. The beam cut through the darkness, making shadows jump on the walls. Then she heard the footsteps. They were heavy and slow, coming up the stairs. More than one person. Heart began to beat faster. Her father always called before he came home, and those footsteps were too heavy to be human. Heard them too. He stopped chewing and lifted his head. His small eyes were fixed on the door. A low growl began to build in his throat. The door opened. 3 soldiers stood in the hallway. They were huge, nearly 2 meters tall with rough brown skin and 4 arms each. They wore black armor and carried weapons at their sides. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark. "There she is," one of them said. His voice was deep and rough like rocks grinding together, just like they said, "alone." "Grab her," said another, "quick, before anyone notices." The first soldier stepped into the room. He reached for with 2 of his arms. He never touched her. Moved faster than any of them could see. One moment he was on the floor. The next moment he was on the soldier's face, claws digging into flesh, teeth sinking into the soft tissue around the eyes. The soldier screamed. It was a horrible sound, high and full of pain and surprise. He tried to grab the honey badger, but skin was loose and thick. When the soldier pulled, simply twisted inside his own skin and kept biting. Blood sprayed across the room. The soldier stumbled backward, crashing into his companions. The second soldier raised his weapon, but had already moved. He dropped from the first soldier's face and lunged at the second one's hand. His jaws locked around 3 fingers and bit down hard. There was a crunch of breaking bone. The soldier dropped his weapon and howled. Did not freeze. She did not scream. She did exactly what her father had told her to do. She ran. She grabbed the emergency beacon from under her pillow and sprinted for the door. She ducked under the third soldier's reaching arms and was in the hallway before he could react. Behind her, she could hear snarling and the soldiers cursing and crashing into things. The maintenance tunnels. That was where she needed to go. Her father had shown her the entrance in the basement. He had made her memorize the paths in case of emergency. She had thought it was silly at the time. Now she understood. She ran down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. Her flashlight bounced wildly, throwing crazy shadows everywhere. She could hear the soldiers coming after her, their heavy footsteps shaking the walls. But she was small and fast, and she knew this building better than they did. She reached the basement and found the hatch that led to the tunnels. It was heavy, but she was strong for her age. She pulled it open and dropped down into the darkness below. The tunnels were narrow and cold and smelled like machine oil. Pipes ran along the walls and ceiling, carrying water and air and electricity to the buildings above. Had played down here many times when she was younger. She knew every turn, every junction, every dead end. She pressed the button on her emergency beacon. A small red light began to blink. She did not know if anyone would see the signal with the power out, but she had to try. A moment later, she heard claws clicking on metal. Then a small warm body pressed against her leg. As she whispered, the honey badger looked up at her. His fur was wet with blood, but she could tell it was not his. His eyes glinted in the light of her flashlight. He was breathing hard, but he was not afraid. He was never afraid. Picked him up and held him close. He was heavy and solid and real. As long as she had him, she was not alone. Above them, she could hear the soldiers dropping into the tunnels. Their voices echoed in the narrow space. "Find her. The boss will kill us if we lose her." That thing nearly took my eyes. What was that? Some kind of earth animal. Forget about it. Focus on the girl. They did not understand. They thought was just a pest, a minor obstacle they had already overcome. They did not know that he was still here. They did not know that he was just getting started. Began to move deeper into the tunnels. She knew where she was going. There was an old communication relay about 1 kilometer away. Her mother had shown it to her once, a long time ago. If she could reach it, maybe she could send a message. Behind her, she could hear the soldiers spreading out. They were hunting her now. They thought they were the predators and she was the prey. They were wrong. Was not prey. She was a daughter and her mother had been a hero. She was a child and her father had taught her to survive. She was alone in the dark with monsters hunting her. But she was not helpless. She had her beacon, she had her knowledge of the tunnels, and she had. The honey badger shifted in her arms and made that low sound that was not quite a purr and not quite a growl. He was ready. He was always ready. Somewhere above them, Lord was sitting in his quarters, drinking expensive wine and waiting for news that the girl had been captured. He thought the hardest part was over. He had no idea that the hardest part had not even begun. The maintenance tunnels beneath Seven stretched for kilometers in every direction. They were a maze of pipes and wires and narrow passages that only the engineers truly understood. For the soldiers, it was like hunting in a nightmare. For it was like coming home. She moved quickly but quietly through the darkness. Her flashlight was off now. She did not need it. She had walked these paths so many times that her feet knew the way. Every turn, every junction, every low-hanging pipe was mapped in her memory. Walked beside her, his claws clicking softly on the metal floor. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting light that was not there. He could see better than she could down here. When he stopped, she stopped. When he moved, she moved. They were a team. Behind them, the soldiers were not doing well. The first group of 3 had called for backup. Now there were 9 soldiers in the tunnels, spreading out in teams of 3, trying to cover as much ground as possible. They had lights and weapons and communication devices. They thought they had every advantage. They were wrong. The tunnels were too narrow for their large bodies. They had to bend down to fit through some passages. Their 4 arms kept bumping into pipes and walls. They could not move quietly. Their heavy boots rang on the metal floor like drums announcing their position. And then there was. The honey badger had stopped following. He had slipped away into the darkness, moving through spaces too small for the soldiers to follow. He knew what he was doing. He had been hunted before, back when he was young and caged and angry. He knew how to turn hunters into prey. The first attack came without warning. A soldier named was walking at the back of his group when something dropped onto his shoulders from above. He felt claws dig into his neck and teeth sink into his ear. He screamed and spun around, slamming his back into the wall, but the creature was already gone. Blood poured down his neck. His ear was in pieces. "What was that?" his partner shouted. "The animal," gasped. "The earth animal, it came from the ceiling." "Impossible, there is nothing up there." But was already gone, sliding through a ventilation duct, circling around to find his next target. He was not trying to kill them. He was trying to scare them. He was trying to slow them down, and it was working. 2 soldiers decided they had had enough. They had signed up to kidnap a child, not to fight a demon in the dark. They told their commander they were going back to the surface to get medical help for. They did not return. Heard the screams echoing through the tunnels. She did not stop. She did not look back. She knew what was doing and she trusted him. Her job was to reach the communication relay. His job was to buy her time. She ran. The relay station was old. It had been built when the colony was first established, before the main communication tower was constructed. Most people had forgotten it existed, but mother had shown it to her once during a tour of the tunnels. "This is important," her mother had said. "Remember where it is, just in case." Had remembered. The station was just a small room carved into the rock, filled with old equipment covered in dust. Most of it did not work anymore, but the emergency pulse transmitter was still connected to the maintenance grid. Mother had made sure of that. Knelt in front of the transmitter and studied the controls. They were complicated, full of switches and buttons and blinking lights. She did not know exactly how they worked, but she remembered something her mother had taught her. "Code is just a language," her mother had said. "If you learn the words, you can make the machine speak." Had learned to read code before she learned to read books. Her mother had taught her during the long nights when her father was working. It had been a game to them, a way to pass the time. Now it was going to save her life. She found the pulse transmitter's control panel and began to work. She could not send a message. The syndicate was jamming all signals, but she could do something else. She could create a loop, a repeated pulse that would run through the maintenance grid like a heartbeat. Every engineer on the station would notice it. It would be wrong, out of place, impossible to ignore. Her fingers moved quickly over the controls. She made mistakes and fixed them. She tried things that did not work and tried other things. The minutes stretched into hours. Her eyes burned. Her hands shook. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of fighting getting closer. Was still out there, still hunting, still holding the soldiers back. But he was just one small animal against many enemies. He could not hold them forever. Finally, the transmitter hummed to life. A steady pulse began to flow through the maintenance grid. It was simple, just a repeated pattern of ones and zeros. But to any engineer who knew what to look for, it would be unmistakable. It said, "Something is wrong, someone needs help." Slumped back against the wall, she had done everything she could. Now she had to wait and hope. Found her a few minutes later. He was limping. His fur was matted with blood, some of it his own this time. A patch of skin on his side was burned where a plasma shot had grazed him, but his eyes were still bright and his teeth were still bared. "Good boy," whispered. She picked him up carefully and held him close. He was trembling, but not from fear, from exhaustion. He had fought so hard for her. She could hear the soldiers getting closer. There were only 6 of them left now. 3 had given up. 1 was too injured to continue, but 6 was still too many, had nowhere left to run. And then she heard something else. Footsteps, but not the heavy boots of the soldiers. These were lighter, faster, more familiar. Human footsteps. It was her father's voice. Came around the corner with 3 other human workers behind him. They were carrying mining tools and welding torches. Their faces were grim and determined. They had seen the pulse in the maintenance grid. They had known something was wrong, and they had come. Father said. Her voice was calm. She did not cry. She had stopped crying a long time ago. Ran to her and wrapped his arms around her. He held her so tight that she could barely breathe. His whole body was shaking. "I am here," he said. "I am here now. No one will hurt you." The other workers spread out, forming a protective circle around them. One of them, a woman named, noticed the wounded honey badger in his arms. "Is that blood his?" she asked. "Most of it is not," said. His eyes went wide. Then she laughed, a short, sharp sound of surprise and admiration. "That little thing did all that." "He protected me," said. "He always protects me." The soldiers arrived a minute later. They came around the corner expecting to find one small girl alone in the dark. Instead, they found 4 angry humans armed with tools designed to cut through rock. The lead soldier stopped. He looked at the humans. He looked at the mining lasers in their hands. He looked at the honey badger in the girl's arms, still baring its teeth despite its wounds. "This is not what we agreed to," he said. "No," replied. His voice was quiet and cold. "It is not." The soldier raised his weapon. It was the last mistake he ever made. The news spread through the human population of 7 like fire through dry grass. A child had been targeted. A little girl had been hunted through the tunnels by alien soldiers. Someone had tried to take one of their own. For years, the humans on 7 had kept their heads down. They had done their work. They had accepted the insults and the disrespect. They had watched the look down on them and the push them aside, and they had said nothing. They were workers, laborers, nothing more. That was what they had let the galaxy believe. The galaxy had believed wrong. Within 1 hour of the news breaking, every human on the station had armed themselves. There were 43 of them in total. Engineers, miners, maintenance workers, cooks, medical staff. Men and women who had spent their lives fixing things and building things and keeping things running. They knew every system on 7. They knew every weakness. And now they were very, very angry. Was a dock worker. She had worked the loading bays for 15 years. When she heard what had happened, she walked to the ambassador's personal ship and opened the fuel lines. She watched the expensive fuel spray out into space, thousands of credits worth of propellant disappearing in seconds. Then she welded the lines shut so they could not be refilled. Was an air system technician. He went to the syndicate's temporary quarters and quietly adjusted the oxygen mix. Not enough to kill anyone, just enough to make them dizzy and slow and unable to think clearly. They would not notice until it was too late. And 3 other workers sealed the exits from the residential block. They used industrial welding equipment to fuse the doors shut. The soldiers who had remained on the surface found themselves trapped, unable to help their companions below or escape to their ship. Led a team of 5 engineers into the tunnels. They moved quickly and quietly, using paths they did not know existed. They came up behind the soldiers who had been hunting. The mining lasers they carried were designed to cut through asteroid rock. They cut through armor just as easily. There was no negotiation. There were no warnings. The soldiers had come to take a child. The humans came to end them. In the end, 7 lay dead in the tunnels. The remaining soldiers surrendered. They had never seen anything like this. They had been told humans were soft and weak and easy to control. They had been told this would be a simple job. No one had told them what happens when you threaten a human child. Above, Lord realized that something had gone very wrong. His communication device was full of panicked messages from syndicate agents. The soldiers were not responding. The ship could not take off. The air in his quarters felt thick and strange. He tried to contact the station's security forces, but they were not answering. He tried to contact his colleagues, but they had locked themselves in their rooms and refused to get involved. He was alone. When the knock came at his door, Lord did not answer. When the door was cut open with a welding torch, he backed into the corner of his room and tried to look dignified. A crowd of humans stood in the hallway. Their faces were calm. Their eyes were cold. They did not speak. They did not need to. At the front of the crowd was a small girl holding a wounded honey badger. Her clothes were dirty and torn. Her face was smeared with dust and dried blood, but her eyes were steady and unafraid. "You did this," said. His voice was quiet. "You sold my daughter to slavers." "I had no choice," said. His voice was high and thin with fear. "I owed money. They threatened me. I was going to die." "You should have let them kill you." Looked at the crowd of humans. He looked at their weapons and their cold eyes and their absolute silence. He had always thought of humans as emotional creatures, loud and messy and easy to manipulate. But there was no emotion in those eyes. There was only judgment. "The Galactic Council will hear of this," said. "You cannot harm a diplomatic representative. There will be consequences." "Yes," said, "there will be." He stepped aside. The crowd parted. At the end of the hallway, the station's security AI flickered to life on a wall screen. "Lord of the Trade Delegation," the AI said in its flat mechanical voice. "You are charged with conspiracy to commit kidnapping, trafficking of sentient beings, and accessory to attempted murder. You will be held for trial by the Galactic Council." His face went pale. A trial meant evidence. Evidence meant recordings. Recordings of his conversations with the syndicate, recordings of his orders, recordings of everything. He was finished. 2 humans stepped forward to take him, but before they could reach him, walked up to the ambassador. She was so small compared to him. The top of her head barely reached his waist, but when she looked up at him, he found he could not meet her eyes. "You tried to take me away from my father," she said. Her voice was soft but clear. "You tried to sell me like I was a thing." Said nothing. Held up, the honey badger was still alive, still conscious despite his wounds. His small black eyes fixed on his face, his lips pulled back from his teeth. "Wants to say goodbye," said. Before anyone could stop her, she lifted the honey badger towards hand, lunged forward and bit down hard. There was a crunch of bone, screamed. 2 of his fingers fell to the floor. The crowd of humans did not move. They did not help. They watched in silence as collapsed to his knees, clutching his bleeding hand. "That is for my mother," said. "She died protecting children from people like you." She turned and walked away. Her father followed. The crowd parted for them like water around a stone. Behind them, the other humans dragged to his feet and handed him over to the security AI for processing. He would live. He would go to trial. He would spend the rest of his life in a prison cell, remembered as the fool who had tried to steal a human child. The next morning, sat in the medical bay while a doctor treated its wounds. The honey badger was unconscious now, sleeping peacefully while the medicine did its work. He would live. He had 11 separate injuries, including plasma burns and bite wounds from fighting back, but he would live. Sat beside his daughter, holding her hand. "I am sorry," he said. "I should have been there. I should have protected you." "You came," said. "You always come. But you had to fight alone. You had to face those monsters by yourself." Looked at, sleeping on the medical table. "I was not alone," she said. "I have never been alone." Squeezed her hand. He did not know what to say. His daughter had faced death and had not flinched. She had sent a distress signal using skills her mother had taught her. She had survived in the tunnels for hours while a predator hunted her. She was 8 years old. And she was more human than anyone he had ever known. Outside the medical bay, the other humans were gathering. They were talking about what had happened. They were talking about what it meant. For the first time in years, they were not keeping their heads down. Something had changed on 7. And soon the whole galaxy would know. The Galactic Council chamber was the largest room on the station. It was built to impress and intimidate, with high ceilings and walls covered in the flags of 100 different worlds. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in tiered rows, looking down at the speaker's platform in the center. The chamber was full. Word of the 7 incident had spread quickly. Every race, every nation, every trading company wanted to know what had happened. And more importantly, they wanted to know what would happen next. The delegation had demanded an emergency session. They accused the humans of unprovoked violence against a diplomatic representative. They demanded reparations. They demanded justice. They spoke of humans as savage beings who could not be trusted. The syndicate, through legitimate representatives who claimed no knowledge of the kidnapping attempt, also demanded action. 7 of their people were dead. Surely, they argued, this was an overreaction. Surely the humans should be punished. Other races watched and waited. Many of them saw this as an opportunity. Humans had become useful workers throughout the galaxy, taking jobs that other races did not want. If they could be shown as dangerous and unstable, perhaps new restrictions could be placed on them. Perhaps they could be controlled more easily. But then Ambassador Shin took the floor. Was a small woman in her 60s with gray hair and calm eyes. She had been humanity's representative to the Galactic Council for 20 years. In all that time, she had never raised her voice. She had never shown anger. She had smiled at insults and nodded at criticisms, and patiently worked to improve humanity's position through diplomacy and negotiation. Today she was not smiling. "Honored representatives," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the chamber. "I have heard your complaints. I have listened to your demands. Now you will listen to me." She touched a control panel, and a holographic screen appeared above the platform. Images began to play. Security footage from 7. The chamber watched in silence. They saw 3 soldiers break into a child's room. They saw a small creature launch itself at the first soldier's face. They saw the girl run into the darkness while the honey badger fought. They saw hours of footage from the tunnels. They saw the honey badger appear from vents and shadows, attacking again and again. They saw soldiers twice its size screaming in fear and pain. They saw plasma burns on its body that should have killed it, and they saw it keep fighting. They saw a little girl reach a communication relay and send a distress signal using skills she had learned from her dead mother. They saw her wait in the dark, holding her wounded companion, while monsters hunted her. They saw human workers move through the station with the precision of a military unit. They saw dock workers disable ships. They saw technicians seal exits. They saw engineers cut through solid metal to reach the child. They saw a girl, covered in dirt and blood, hold up a honey badger to bite off the fingers of the man who had tried to sell her. When the footage ended, the chamber was silent. Let the silence stretch, then she spoke. "You made 3 mistakes," she said. "I will explain them to you so that you do not make them again." She held up one finger. "First, you targeted a child. I do not think you understand what this means to humans. We are a young species. We have not been traveling the stars for very long. We do not have ancient traditions or powerful weapons or vast empires. What we have is our children. They are our future. They are everything we hope to become. When you threaten a human child, you are not threatening one person. You are threatening our entire species, and we respond accordingly." She held up a second finger. "Second, you underestimated the honey badger. I will admit it does look harmless. It is small. It is not particularly fast or strong. But the honey badger is one of the most feared creatures on our home planet. It attacks animals 10 times its size. It shrugs off venom from snakes that would kill other creatures. It feels pain, but it does not stop. It feels fear, but it ignores it. The honey badger survives because it refuses to give up. Does this sound familiar? It should. Humans are the same." She held up a third finger. "Third, and this is the most important, you assumed that our compassion was weakness. You saw us bond with our children, with our pets, with each other, and you thought we were soft. You were wrong. Our compassion is not weakness. It is the source of our strength. We fight for the things we love. We die for the things we love. And we never, ever forget those who hurt the things we love." She lowered her hand and looked around the chamber. "That girl you tried to take, her name is. She is 8 years old. Her mother died protecting children from pirates. Her father works 16-hour shifts to give her a better life. Her only companion is a small animal that was rescued from abuse and has repaid that kindness with absolute loyalty." Pointed at the frozen image on the screen. Standing in a corridor in her arms, surrounded by the bodies of those who had tried to hurt her. "That girl will grow up. She will remember who hurt her. She will remember who helped her. She will remember who stood by and did nothing. And one day she will have power. She will have influence. She will have the ability to make decisions that affect the galaxy." His voice grew quieter, but somehow more intense. "Every human child you see is a future engineer, a future diplomat, a future leader. Every act of kindness toward them is remembered. Every act of cruelty is remembered too. We are a species with long memories and absolute loyalty. We do not forget. We do not forgive. And we do not stop." She turned to face the delegation directly. "Your ambassador tried to sell a child into slavery to pay his gambling debts. He is alive because we chose to hand him over for trial instead of doing what we wanted to do. Consider that a gift. Consider it the last gift you will receive from us if anything like this ever happens again." The delegation said nothing. They could not meet her eyes. Looked at the representatives from the syndicate. "Your soldiers are dead because they tried to kidnap an innocent girl. You can call it an overreaction if you want. I call it a warning. The next time someone wearing your colors threatens a human child, there will be no survivors to complain about it." The representatives were silent. Turned to face the entire chamber. "We did not ask to be part of your galaxy. We did not ask to work your mines and fix your machines and clean your stations. But we are here now, and you will learn to live with us. You will learn that we are not the soft, emotional creatures you thought we were. You will learn that our bonds are not weaknesses but weapons. You will learn that the smallest of us can bring down the largest of you." She pointed at the screen one final time. "Look at that girl. Look at that animal. Remember them, because they are the future of humanity, small, underestimated, and absolutely unwilling to give up." She turned and walked off the platform. The council quietly dropped all charges against Seven. 3 years later, stood at the entrance of the Galactic Academy. She was 11 now, taller and stronger, with the same steady eyes she had always had. She wore the uniform of a first-year student, the first human child ever admitted on full scholarship. On her shoulder sat, he was older now, his muzzle gray, his body covered in scars. But his eyes were still bright and his teeth were still sharp. He had never left her side. He never would. Around them, alien students whispered and pointed. Some of them had heard the stories. Some of them had seen the footage. All of them knew who she was. Walked through the doors of the academy with her head held high, rode on her shoulder like a king surveying his kingdom. Neither of them looked back. In the crowd behind them, an older student turned to his friend. "Should we warn the others?" he asked. "Tell them not to bother her." His friend shook his head. "No need," he said. "Everyone knows no one will touch her. Because of the humans. Because of the honey badger." They watched disappear into the academy, the small gray animal on her shoulder. "The galaxy learned its lesson," the friend said quietly. "Never stand between a human child and a honey badger." "Why not?" "Because neither of them knows how to give up, and together they are unstoppable." The doors closed behind. Her future was just beginning, and no one would ever stand in her way again. But by then it would be far too late.